And sometimes, fake compliance is great until you have an opportunity to execute the technique. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Coach Daryl Johnson, the founder of HTK Krav Maga, Harder to Kill, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about Krav Maga and handgun defenses and how we choose them and how they work. So let's go over the weapon first. If you're not familiar with most handguns, well, they all have similar parts. Some are different. This one is an example of a semi-automatic. It's obviously not real. It's plastic or rubberized plastic. So we use them for safety. There are the parts that we want to be concerned with is the muzzle, where the bullet exits the weapon. The trigger, which is inside this round circular guard, that's what fires the weapon. The magazine, which would be inserted in here where the cartridges are. And the slide, which is the part of metal that slides back and forth, hence its name, and extracts the cartridge and feeds a new one in. Now, it's possible you might be faced with a revolver, which has a cylindrical loading mechanism that just rotates to the next cartridge. The shells are not ejected. It's an older technology. It's a little more reliable when you're touching somebody or when somebody's, if you're grabbing a hold of it. However, it's still able to be defeated. The primary principle of handgun defenses, as far as how I'm going to defend against a handgun threat. Now, this doesn't mean someone's actively shooting at me. Active shooter is different than handgun defense or handgun threat. So the threat is the person presents me with a weapon, they want something from me, they want my wallet, they want me, to go somewhere with them. Generally speaking, if it's a property crime and they want my wallet, my keys, my shoes, I'm probably going to comply because whatever property you have isn't really worth dying for. The exceptions would be, as far as when you would want maybe do a handgun defense, perhaps they want to take you to a secondary location, which is never good, or it's some kind of a personal vendetta. The person wants to intimidate you. Maybe they're monologuing. So there's a good chance if you're being shot. Generally speaking, if you're probably not going to be shot, it's better to comply. But every situation is a little bit different, and sometimes fake compliance is great until you have an opportunity to execute the technique. Having said that, let's go over the key elements of a handgun defense. 4 parts of handgun defense: redirect the line of fire, control the weapon, attack the assailant, take away the weapon from the assailant. The most important part of those is redirect. So what that means is the muzzle where the bullet comes out, now I want to make sure I'm not in front of it. So sometimes I can move the weapon offline, sometimes I can move myself offline, or oftentimes it's a combination of the two. Generally speaking, it's a lot harder to move my entire body to a situation where I'm not in the front of the gun, as opposed to just simply moving the gun a few inches so it's offline from hitting me. The farther away the gun is, the less I have to move it. If it's literally touching me, I have to move it quite a bit to make sure I'm no longer in line of fire. If it's a few feet away, a few inches of movement will now take me out of the line of fire. That's important to remember. And that will often dictate which technique you do, if it's touching you or not, if it's far enough away where you can't get 2 hands on it, if you're being put, things that will change that. Your instructor will be able to clarify those. Generally speaking, they're front, side, and back are the basic. And then we do, where I'm being held hostage, or if at a distance, or they're grabbing my shirt, or there's all kinds of situations we'll eventually cover. But the basic ones are front, side, and back. Now, that being said, the handgun techniques that I teach for our basics I've got from my instructor, Master Itai Gill, and they are more oriented into controlling the weapon before you do the attacking and takeaway. Many Krav Maga systems, when I originally learned, a lot of the techniques were designed to redirect. They always start with that. And then you get into the situation where, okay, now I want to get control of the weapon, maybe with one hand, maybe with, maybe I strike, maybe I do 2 hands, maybe I do 2 hands and an arm wrap or something of that nature. Then I attack the person, I punch them, kick the groin, kick the leg, and then I take the gun away. Taking the gun away is the least important part of this whole process. It's the part everybody loves. It's cool. It's nifty. And that's also where, if you're not careful, a lot of injuries can happen in class. Oftentimes when you do your takeaway, if the person's finger is still in the trigger guard, there's a good chance of it being injured when you do the takeaways. So you have to be very careful when you train. We even have a couple of the weapons where we cut the trigger off to avoid that from being an issue. But for us, the most important part, and with all gun defenses, is redirect the line of fire. If the weapon is not pointed directly at me, it's going to be easier to do the thing. If I don't take care of that, I may get shot. Now, just because you've been shot doesn't mean the fight is over. And I'm sure if you were in the internet age, like as we are now, you've seen videos of people being shot multiple times where they're still fighting. they may not survive the encounter in the long run, but the fight is still going on. There's only a few spots in the human body, in the central nervous system, that will stop the fight immediately. And, you know, maybe you get hit there, maybe they don't, maybe the bad guy gets hit there. Maybe, you know, maybe you have your own weapon. Regardless, I want to focus on being very aggressive with my counterattacks, and I want to have positive control. My preference as an instructor is to teach techniques where I get multiple hands, 2 hands on the weapon, or 2 hands and other body parts where I'm really controlling the gun. For me, and this is, you know, for our basics, we have other ones. If the weapon is here, I want my entire body to be behind that muzzle. Okay, not just having it not pointed at me. I want to have my entire, so here, if I move the gun over here, this is great. It's not pointing at me, but it doesn't take much for the person to step around, point the gun back up at me. So I want to do everything I can to get as much of my body mass behind the muzzle as possible. Now, there are some techniques you're not able to do that. So it doesn't work all the time, but that's kind of my thought is, if I can get my body mass behind the muzzle, not only is it not pointing at me, it's a lot harder to get it back onto me as a target again. So I hope you guys find that useful. I mean, obviously, I will show some individual techniques as we move along. I wanted to give you the overview, redirect the line of fire, control the weapon, attack the assailant, and then take the gun away. All right, thanks for joining me.